Greetings, Professor. Greetings, class. My name is Catherine Walker, and today I will be discussing an ethical case study for the Ford Motor Company. Bottom line up front, by the end of this presentation, you will have a clear understanding of who Ford Motor Company is and the ethical dilemma that the company faced back in the 1970s, 1980s time frame. We will also discuss the ethical framework that was used and the decisions that was made during that time period, as well as an alternative that could have produced a more desirable outcome. We'll cover the legal repercussions and close out with lessons learned. Ford Motor Company has been around for quite a while. It's actually one of the first major franchise vehicle companies in American history, founded by Mr. Henry Ford back on June 16, 1903. The company is multinational at this time and is headquartered in Dearborn, Michigan. And of course, they make several makes and models of vehicles to include SUVs, compact vehicles like their Ford Focus, Ford Fiesta, and they also have their popular Ford F-150 pickup truck, okay? Back in the 1970s and the 1980s, Ford Motor Company produced a new vehicle called the Pinto, and is pictured here, top of this slide here, of what the vehicle looked like when it was created. And the ethical dilemma that they faced is that their own crash test, that means Ford Motor Company, while they were in the process of creating this new vehicle, the Ford Pinto, they had to test it in their labs to make sure that it was safe for consumers to use and that it could survive if it was to get into a vehicle accident or a collision. And what was revealed is that if the vehicle was rear-ended at low speeds, like I'm talking about 30 to 35 miles per hour to be more specific, the gas tank within the vehicle would actually rupture, and of course leading to possible explosion. In addition, there has been reports that the doors would lock in as well, making it difficult or impossible for the passengers to escape the vehicle. The options that Ford Motor Company had in order to resolve their findings of the shaky crash test results was to recall their vehicles and complete the necessary retrofits in order to ensure that the customers would be safe while utilizing the vehicle. The other option was to do nothing and hope for the best, as it would be cheaper to pay off the settlements versus making mass modifications, and also the delays and the potential loss in sales from having to recall a vehicle that should have been out on the market, okay? So what decision did Ford Motor Company decide to make? They chose to process a cost-benefit analysis to weigh the outcome of the potential benefits versus the cost of how much it would be in order to make the required updates, modifications, retrofits to their death trap. It's been dubbed death trap, fire trap vehicles, those Ford Pintos. So Ford Company, Motor Company, determined based off of that cost benefit analysis that was conducted that it will be cheaper to settle the future lawsuits that may come versus making the necessary safety retrofits. I was not able to locate a copy of the actual cost benefit analysis and what all went into making this determination. However, because this vehicle was new at the time, I have a feeling that potential loss in sales and timing, the timing had a factoring role into why they decided to push forward with putting the vehicles out versus recalling, taking the lost time to make sure they got it right. Okay. What ethical framework was Ford Motor Company using? I would say they weren't really using a framework, but for the purposes of this presentation, the professor specifically asked us to choose out of 3 options. We had utilitarianism, egoism, and another option. I'm not able to see my notes. Wait, here they are. And the free market ethics were the 3 options that we had to choose from. And so based off of those 3 options that I was limited in selecting, I chose egoism. And to summarize what egoism means in a nutshell is pretty much we're going to do what's in our own best interest. The company decided to do what was in its own best interest, and pretty much they weren't factoring in entities, energies, people outside of themselves. They decided to focus specifically in on what would make their company more profitable. To make a long story very short. And the last bullet point summarized pretty much the point that I'm wanting to get across here. The company chose to save money and time. I should add time here. So I'm saying it now verbally, time. They wanted to save money and time for themselves versus saving lives. And the action spoke louder than words here because they knew it wasn't a factor of them not knowing that their vehicles weren't safe. Their own test studies showed that the vehicle wasn't safe, and they decided to push ahead anyway with that full knowledge of the safety risks that were at hand. Okay, next slide. An alternative ethical framework that could have been adopted based off of the options that was provided to us by the professor, I chose to use the Blanchard-Peale framework, which was developed by Ken Blanchard and Norman Vincent Peale, who's actually an author, if I'm not mistaken. I think I've read a couple of books of his. And in order to apply this ethical framework, is pretty simple. You have to ask yourself 3 questions, but you need to make sure that you answer them honestly. The first question is it legal? The second question the company should have asked is it fair? And the third question that the company could have asked themselves prior to moving forward with their decision is, how does it make me feel? Now, the part for is it legal? As we develop further in this presentation, we will see that the policies at that time was not very clear. They were very ambiguous, and it's not so much as the company was blatantly breaking a law. However, the last 2 questions I think are more pertinent to the details that have been described, such as, is it fair? Is it fair to subject people to possible death or, serious burn injuries and trauma and the pain because I refuse to pause on releasing my vehicle and making sure that it is safe for people to use? That I don't think that was very fair. It may have been fair in the company's perspective, as far as saving money, meeting their deadline for getting the vehicle released. However, you subjected society to harm, and for no good reason, because they knew that the vehicle was unsafe and that explosions were likely to happen at very low speeds. You could just be cruising down the neighborhood at 30, 35 miles per hour and get hit, and now your life could possibly be lost. That's just ridiculous to me. How does it make me feel? If the company was being honest with themselves, I bet you I have a feeling that they weren't riding around in those vehicles. So if you don't feel comfortable, I'm talking about the company now, Ford Motor Company. If you wouldn't feel comfortable having your family pack in and pile in into your vehicle you created and released out into the market for people to buy, if you wouldn't feel comfortable and confident that you would be able to survive if something was to go down, how could you release this vehicle for other people and play games with people's lives like that and bank on the lawsuits coming out cheaper when you can't put a price on life? Life is you can't put a price tag on a person's life. So I'm gonna move on to the next slide. Legal repercussions. As expected and as forecasted in the cost benefit analysis that was conducted by Ford Motor Companies, lawsuits did come. One main major citation that I located was the Grimshaw versus Ford Motor Company case that took place back in 1981. And a person actually lost their life driving on the highway out in California. And believe it or not, the speed, I believe it, because traffic in California, I guess it must have always been traffic, even back in those days. They were going 30 to 35 miles per hour. The driver got rear-ended. The person who was driving the vehicle lost their lives because the gas tank exploded. She couldn't escape. Life lost. The passenger, teenager, suffered burn injuries, third-degree burn injuries, and now, I don't know how he looks right now, present day, or if he's still living or not. But it could have been avoided. I know that. This tort action, this was considered to be a tort. So this tort action resulted in a $2.5 million settlement being awarded to the Grimshaw, the family that lost their lives. Well, one person lost their life, one person suffered severe burn injuries. There was another family, the Gray family. They got close to $600K due to damages. The court was so disgusted with the conduct of Ford Motor Company that they added on an additional $3.5 million in punitive damages to punish the company for their negligence, right? And I have here a note that initially the court actually ordered Ford Motor Company to pay $125 million. This was to be a punishment and a deterrent for their conduct, for knowingly putting out a vehicle that they knew wasn't safe, right? Okay. But after that ruling was passed, Ford Motor Company lawyered up and appealed the court's decision. And for some reason, the court went on ahead and granted their request and reduced the amount to the $3.5 million that is reported here on this slide. They got a, I'm not in agreement with that decision. I don't know. I feel like they should have paid that $125 million or more. And why? Because this would help to serve as a deterrent, a lesson not to ever do that again. Okay, next slide. I'm going to continue with the legal repercussions. The Ford Pinto has been dubbed the most controversial vehicle that has ever been built. I would say built and possibly allowed to be released. At the time, the National Highway Traffic Administration, who's actually responsible for ensuring that vehicles meet safety regulations prior to being distributed to consumers for purchase, they found it difficult to hold Ford to I want to word it as they weren't able to force. I'll put it like that. They didn't have the legal backing via policy to enforce, to sway, to make Ford Motor Vehicle recall those vehicles and put in the adequate retrofits because of the mile per hour and because of the verbiage of the policy. The policy didn't make it clear. It was like a lot of loopholes, very ambiguous, and so it was kind of National Highway Traffic Administration was kind of in a catch-22 because, as mentioned in the previous slide, Ford wasn't actually breaking per se, like knowingly breaking per se, any established rules, laws, regulations. And that's because the policies at that time were so ambiguous. Next, what are the key takeaways from this ethical case review of Ford Motor Vehicle and their Pinto? I've listed 4 bullet points. The first one is to temper cost with social responsibility. I understand that businesses are in the mindset of maximizing profits. And I understand that when a company is publicly traded, they are feeling a responsibility to produce results for their shareholders. And by results, I mean income, money, profit, right? However, it's important not to lose sight of your humanity and just common decency. And it will be beneficial to factor that in during the decision-making process. I have a finance background. I know a lot of times we tend to look at the numbers because numbers don't tend to lie. You know, we always say numbers don't lie. Numbers are truthful, factual, it can be verified, it can be validated. And it's important for us in the finance department, finance professions, to have a more holistic view. Yeah, the numbers may not lie, but it's other things that are important, such as life. Life. Life is a lot more important than the bottom line. Period. Okay. Next is don't skimp on safety requirements. I feel as though if the necessary safety requirements would have been made um, at the onset of the crash testing, lives would have been saved. These unnecessary time in court, this was a case that didn't even need to go to court because we could have did the right thing from the front end. We wouldn't have to be wasting time, energy, money, resources on having to show up to court to justify why you felt it unnecessary to implement the necessary safety measures. That don't make sense to me. They're very lucky I wasn't the judge hearing the case at that particular time. Okay. Cultivate forward thinking. So yes, it's good to do a cost benefit analysis, but it's also good to think about what your decision, the impact that your decision will have as you go forward. Their reputation took a hit. Heck, the Pinto is known as a death trap, a fire trap. They don't even call the Ford Pinto a Ford Pinto. A lot of times, when I was doing my research, the vehicle was coming up dubbed as death trap. Now, I imagine that that would be a significant hit on sales, as well as impacting the trust of your consumers. I kind of feel ashamed. I have a Ford. I own a Ford right now, present day. And honestly, I'm just a little bit shocked. I even think that Henry Ford, the founder, he was a lot of things, so they say. But allowing that Ford Pinto to be sold to consumers like that, I don't think he would have done it. And then also, we know that we need to close the loopholes within existing policies. This is really not geared towards Ford Motor Company, but towards the the governmental officials and policymakers. And this really isn't just a Ford related issue or automobile industry issue. It's all the way across the line. These policies and these regulations, a lot of times they lack clarity and they're not concise. They're too ambiguous. And it appears to change depending on the circumstance. It's just too many variables. And then there's so many, it's so many policies and regulations on just about everything, and yet they make, they don't tend to make a lot of sense. They don't seem to be very intuitive, and they're difficult to enforce because it's difficult to understand. I mean, these policies, policymakers, policymakers. Policy. I just don't have nothing else to say. I have nothing nice to say about this. Nothing kind to say. I'm not very nice, but I am very kind. I don't have nothing kind to say about these daggone policies. So one recommendation, I'm gonna give a recommendation. I don't like to just, throw out a critique without giving a possible solution. So one possible solution for these daggone policies is to actually consult the people who's going to have to actually enact, that's going to have to actually put into place, who's going to have to actually apply and put into practice these policies that you are making. I feel as though these decision makers, they go off into a room and they come up with these regulations that sound good on paper, but amount to, oh my, are difficult to implement in actual practice, which means you need to get someone who's actually in the field, who's actually doing the work, to actually come and have a meeting of the minds with you so you can understand what's actually taking place, what the employees are actually seeing happening in real time, okay? So that you can come up with policies that can actually be enforced for the purposes that they were intended for when they were created. Okay, I'm not going to say nothing else about that. I feel like to wrap it up, to really summarize, I do have something else to say about it. To wrap it up and to finalize it, I feel as though this whole Ford Pinto fiasco wouldn't have even been able to take place if these daggone policies would have been intact and on point, because they wouldn't have even been able to release the vehicle in the first place for purchase by anyone until they addressed that daggone exploding gas tank. That's ridiculous. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, let me know about it. I'll make sure to do my very best to provide a suitable answer. These are a listing of the references that were used in order to prepare this presentation.